They don't need chains anymore. That's the first thing you have to understand. The architecture of control has been modernized, refined, made invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't come to your door. It comes through your door as a menu, a curriculum, a copay, a breaking news alert engineered to make you forget what you were just thinking about. A headline screaming, "Look over there." And by the time you realize what's happening, if you realize, you're already inside it. The foundation is chaos. That part is not accidental. Before the pillars go up, they have to destabilize the ground because the population that feels stable asks questions. A population in free fall just tries to land. So watch what happened. Doge eliminated 260,000 federal jobs in a matter of weeks. Not through legislation, not through debate, through administrative dictate. And overnight, millions of Americans lost access points to Social Security, to federal benefits, to the basic infrastructure of a functioning government. While people were still scrambling to understand what just happened, the first conflict with Iran ignited. 12 days, Operation Midnight Hammer, strikes exchanged, the region holding its breath, and then the Epstein files drop. Not for justice, for noise, and before anyone can process what's actually in those files, a second Iran conflict erupts. More strikes, more threats, annihilation language from the podium. Gas prices climbing 40% while the ceasefire negotiations leak to 3 different outlets with 3 different stories, and the FCC gets threatened, and the Pope gets attacked, and Hungarian elections become a national conversation somehow, and a network loses its license, and the cabinet secretary says something that trends for 6 hours and disappears, and a new executive order rewrites 40 years of environmental regulation in a sentence, and someone leaks something, and someone denies something, and the scroll never stops, the alerts never stop, the outrage never stops. And that is not accidental. That is the design. Make the news cycle so dense, so relentless, so deliberately disorienting that the average person cannot hold a single thread long enough to follow it to its source. This is not chaos. This is strategy. Exhaustion is the point. Eroded trust is the point. Fractured focus is the point. Because in that fog, while you're overwhelmed and overstimulated and arguing about whichever distraction they handed you this week, the real architecture goes up quietly, deliberately, according to a document that has been sitting in plain sight the entire time. 900 pages, a title, authors, a publishing date, a checklist, Project 2025. When you actually read it, not summaries, not takes, the document itself, you stop asking whether this is coordinated. You start watching the line items get executed, chapter by chapter, agency by agency, in sequence. 3 pillars, 1 outcome. A population too cognitively degraded to recognize the pattern, too medically compromised to sustain the resistance, too economically strapped to ever have the leverage to say no. Dumb, sick, and broke. This is a Sunday sermon. I'm not a pastor. Let's go through it. Pillar 1, dumb. Chapter 11 of Project 2025 calls for the elimination of the Department of Education. Not restructuring, not reform, elimination. The language is local control. The translation is remove the federal equity floor so that the education a child receives is determined entirely by the tax base of the zip code they were born into and by the donor interests that have captured the state systems filling the vacuum. What gets cut from those captured curricula? Compound interest, regulatory capture, the actual mechanics of how a lobbyist ghostwrites legislation before it ever reaches a committee, the history that would let you place the present moment in context. They don't need to teach you to be compliant. They just need to make sure you were never taught how to question. And while that's happening in the classroom, something else is happening in your hand. The algorithm is not a product. You are the product. What's being sold is your attention, specifically your enraged, reactive, dopamine-depleted attention, because that version of you doesn't organize. That version of you posts, argues with strangers at 2 in the morning, performs outrage for an audience doing the same thing, scrolls until the feeling passes, then starts again. In Fahrenheit 451, Montague's world didn't burn the books to suppress the knowledge. They burned them because they had already successfully killed the desire to read. The information was never the threat. The habit of thinking was the threat. Pattern recognition is what they're actually afraid of. A population that thinks historically is a population that sees what's coming. So they build the systems, the curriculum gaps, the attention traps, the manufactured noise, to make sure that population never fully forms. Pillar 2, sick. Now tell me something. Why is chronic disease the norm in the wealthiest nation in the history of civilization? 70% of American adults are overweight or obese. 1 in 3 are pre-diabetic or fully diabetic. Heart disease is still the leading cause of death. We spend more on healthcare per capita than any country on earth, more than twice what most developed nations spend, and our outcomes trail the peer group we're supposedly leading. I need you to sit with that for a moment. More money, worse results, every single year. That is not a failure. A failure is unintentional. This is architecture. The FDA's GRAS exemption, generally recognized as safe, allows food manufacturers to self-certify the safety of their own additives. No independent federal law review required. The same industry profiting from ultra-processed food built on industrial seed oils and high fructose corn syrup also funds the nutritional science that legitimizes those ingredients. The USDA simultaneously subsidizes the corn and soy that become those exact inputs. Your tax dollars building the pipeline, delivering the disease. Then the healthcare side of the machine locks in the profit. Insurers own hospital systems. Hospital systems own physician networks. The same conglomerates own the pharmacy benefit managers who decide which treatments get covered at what cost under what conditions. Every layer of this vertical has one financial incentive: not to cure you, to manage you, chronically, profitably, indefinitely. Chapter 6 of Project 2025 targets HHS specifically to reduce federal oversight of this system. More state discretion, more variation, more gaps in what protections you're entitled to depending on where you live. Because the more fragmented the regulatory environment, the more room the machine has to operate. A sick population is a dependent population, dependent on the system that made them sick for the treatments the system profits from delivering. That is not healthcare. That is a subscription model where your body is the recurring invoice and cancellation is not an option they're offering. Part 3, broke. Now we get to the mechanism that makes the first two permanent. BlackRock and Vanguard together hold majority equity positions in virtually every S&P 500 company. I need you to understand what that actually means. It means a single concentrated ownership architecture holds stakes in the company, setting your wages, owning your apartment building, issuing your credit card, servicing your student loan, administering your health insurance, and running the hospital that treats the condition the second pillar helped produce. One hand pulling all of those levers simultaneously. Wages have not kept pace with inflation for most working Americans in decades. Rent increases faster than income. Healthcare consumes 25 to 30% of household budgets for families that have no slack to absorb it. So people borrow at 27, 28, 29% APR from the same institutional architecture that engineered the conditions requiring the loan. Then the tariffs arrives. Import costs rise. The price of goods goes up. The wage floor doesn't move. The gap widens. Debt fills it. And now the question is no longer whether you can build something. The question is whether you can stay above water long enough to see next month. Here's what I need you to understand about debt. It is not just a financial condition. It is a political condition. A person 3 weeks from losing their housing does not have the bandwidth to organize a union, run for school board, attend a city council meeting, or sustain the kind of focus, sustained civic engagement that actually changes anything. They are surviving. And survival mode, that specific, grinding, exhausted survival mode, is precisely the operating state this architecture is designed to produce and maintain. Chapters 9 and 22 of Project 2025 target the FTC, the DOJ Antitrust Division, and Treasury. These are the specific institutions with the statutory authority to break up the consolidation, making all three pillars possible. The blueprint doesn't just describe the world it wants. It identifies the referees and removes them from the field. That is not coincidence. That is a sequence. The receipts? Here's what I want you to hold as we close. The chaos you felt listening to this middle section, that unfamiliar tightening, that sense of too much coming too fast, that wasn't an accident either. That's what they engineered. That's what you have been living inside. And the reason most people haven't connected it to the pillars is because the chaos was designed to prevent exactly that connection. But now you see the sequence. Doge destabilizes the infrastructure. The education pipeline narrows the capacity to question it. The food and healthcare system compromises the body doing the questioning. The debt structure eliminates the time and bandwidth to act on what you actually figured out. And the noise, the relentless, manufactured, algorithmically amplified noise, covers the construction the entire time. Dumb enough not to see it, sick enough not to fight it, broke enough not to survive resisting it. 3 pillars, 1 blueprint. 1 class of beneficiaries sitting above the architecture they built in a world that gets more consolidated, more captured, and more profitable for them with every cycle. They call it freedom. They called it local control. They called it the market. John chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning was the Word. Words are the first tool of power. And the words they chose were chosen to make the cage feel like a choice. Watch the pattern. Follow the money. Read the document. Because the receipts are public. The chapters are numbered. The checklist is being marked off in sequence. And the receipts, as always, don't lie. This is Keith. Comment, like, definitely share. I'm Keith. This is Keith Speaks.